Allies had taken over it were first published. The photographs of the torture is what I call it, and the hooded prisoners standing on boxes, and the men being threatened with dogs on chains. Those photographs seemed so striking to me that in order to digest them and understand them myself, I needed to write a story in which there was a prison and there was some desperation, but also some escape. Let's face it, I'm an American citizen, I can vote, but I can't very well put myself on an airplane and go and rent a tractor and raise a prison outside of Baghdad. I can't do it. I don't know how to drive a tractor, among other things. But I can write a story about prisons and their hold on the imagination, especially in a time of, well, let's call it terror. Why not? Everybody else is.
This relates to another question I had, and that's the first epigraph in Son of a Witch is a quote from de Tocqueville, and the closing epigraph is a quote from Jefferson, both dealing in their way with democracy and democratic peoples. Why did you choose those two quotes specifically? Do they have significance to you outside the scope of the novel?
If they had significance to me outside of the scope of the novel, that would be an insufficient reason for them to be included in the novel. But in a way, I suppose I'm trying to see in the writing of fantasy what can still be examined in that literary form. That is to say, stop and think about the fantasies written for children or for adults and where they take place. They almost all take place in some sort of a medieval construct. What a friend of mine said was a kind of a fairy tale land sometime that was positioned sometime after the fall of Constantinople and before the invention of the internal combustion engine. There was royalty. There were kings and queens. There were knights and serfs. And nobody much questioned the nature of power or how it was used in fantasies. Maybe T.H. White did a little bit in The Once and Future King. But I wanted to write a fantasy world in which how people thought about the power that they had or the power that they didn't have in a social situation, in a political situation, was the main point. So yes, those two quotes were chosen to bracket this story, Son of a Witch, because if Wicked was the tale of a woman finding her individual voice against an oppressive authority, then Son of a Witch is the tale of a man who realizes in order to make an impact, he has to belong to society. He cannot be a hermit.
The Jefferson quote has a finality to it when you read it at the end of the book, and it suggests, I think, that the story is finished. Do you have any plans to return to the characters or to Oz in your writing?
I won't be coy. I don't have any specific plans, but if I do, I have one or two scenes already lodged in my mind as a place where they can, as a place where a third novel might ultimately end. But I won't rush to do it, and if the urgent need to do it, to spend time in this difficult and somewhat ugly terrain, doesn't present itself to me, I won't punish myself by doing it. One of the interesting criticisms of Wicked by some readers, and indeed a few reviewers, was, oh my goodness, Maguire doesn't know how to plot a book. There were all these strands left hanging and everything was just cut off in the middle like he got tired of writing it and that was the end. We don't know what happened to anybody. Well, it may not have been an acceptable reading experience for them, but it was exactly what I intended at the end of Wicked. Wicked was a tragedy. The witch dies. One of the ways that we feel the tragedy of an early death is that we don't know how stories end. It's very different from somebody dying in their old age, looking back on their career, looking back on their children and grandchildren, and summing up. Somebody who dies in midlife leaves stories unfinished, leaves strings unknotted. And I intended that purposely to make the tragedy that much more poignant. Now, in Son of a Witch, there are going to be some elements of the plot that are in fact unresolved. But if you read carefully, you will at least know in what direction things are tending. And let's face it, in our own lives, that's all that we really can know. What direction are things tending to go? Not how will they be, or what must they be, but where are they leaning? That's, I think, an honest way to end a novel. So whether there's a third or not, well, inspiration will have to decide that further down the track.
I'm sure that's very good news for the fans of the books. In a good portion of your other fiction that you've written for adult audiences, you're working within the broad boundaries of pre-existing tales. Could you compare those writing experiences with that of writing a novel like Son of a Witch, where the boundaries are more generally of your own making?
Yes, well, I love to write stories such as Confessions of an Ugly Stepsister or Mirror, Mirror, which take as their basic architecture the shape of a story familiarly known by the common reader, the story of Cinderella, the story of Snow White. The shapes of those stories are so recognizable that, in fact, one finds that as story shapes, they are very capacious and forgiving. They can hold basically any idée fixe that I might have, whether it be about evolution or about beauty, and not be sullied. I'm not doing parodies of them. I'm just using their shapes as a way to hold the ideas that I have and the inquiries that I have at any given moment. However, as you say, Son of a Witch is not like that at all. It's even further removed from The Wizard of Oz than Wicked was. It's almost as if the Oz that I'm writing about now has spun off, and it's an alternative history. It might be an alternative universe, an Oz that's like, but not exactly like, the Oz that we knew when we were children, in the same way that the fiction of any realistic novelist that we might read, be it John Updike or Ann Beatty or Ann Tyler, is like, but subtly unlike, the world in which we live. They're alternative universes.
Well, in that same vein, I guess, you dedicated Son of a Witch to the cast and creative team of the musical theater version of Wicked. And so they took your Oz and imposed their creative vision on that. How was that for you as an author?
Well, it was a delightful experience. I sure hoped you were going to ask me to sing a few notes. So I have brought in a score in my backup, my boom chugga boom chugga boom. So I'll be getting into that in just a moment. In fact, I was very able to be generous in loaning, bequeathing, maybe giving my story up for adoption, as it were, to the capable and sensitive people who put on the musical version of Wicked, partly because, after all, I had inherited part of the story myself, both from L. Frank Baum and from MGM. It seemed a little bit pompous or self-important, let's say, for me to say, well, the Wizard of Oz story was written in 1900 and first filmed in 1914 and then famously filled in 1937, and then in 1975 there was The Wiz on Broadway, and then there was the film, and then in 1995 I wrote Wicked, and their evolution has to stop. I mean, I'm just not that self-important. So it was easy to say, go on, let things be as they will, as long as you can convince me, you people making the play, that you know the main theme of Wicked and you honor it. I was convinced that the people who were doing the play did understand the main themes of my book when Stephen Schwartz, the composer and lyricist, and the person who had the idea that this might be a musical play, said to me, the curtain will open, here's the first thing that will happen, the witch will just have died, and everyone will be on stage singing, No One Mourns the Wicked. And I thought, well, he's got it. He said 5 words to me, no one mourns the wicked, and he is proving to me he knows what my novel was about. So I can deed it over, sign the contracts, and feel that my baby's in good hands, as indeed it was and is.
You also write extensively for younger audiences, chapter books, children's books, the Hamlet Chronicles series.
To keep listening to this audiobook, I've left you a link in the description so you can do it, at no cost thanks to Audible's 30-day free trial.